The train screamed into the frozen emptiness, its iron wheels groaning as they fought the steep Wyoming incline. It was December of 1878, and the blizzard had already claimed 2 lives along the track between Laramie and Rawlins. When the conductor shouted Elk Valley, only one passenger rose from her seat. A woman wrapped in a threadbare shawl, her face half hidden beneath a tattered bonnet. Her name was Eleanor May Whitfield, though in the letters she'd signed to her intended, she simply called herself Nell. The letters had been filled with delicate cursive and cautious hope, sent across states and months to a man she'd never met, Cole Branner, a rancher who had lost more than he cared to say. Nell stepped down from the train, the snow biting at her boots. The platform was nothing more than wooden planks and a single lantern. The wind cut like glass. Her breath rose in white clouds as she looked around for him, the man who had promised her a new beginning. Cole was late. He'd meant to be there before sunset, but his horse had gone lame crossing the icy ridge. Now he came on foot. A tall man in a sheepskin coat, his hat low over his eyes, his stride heavy with the burden of years. He had fought in the war, buried his wife after a cholera fever, and now lived alone with his cattle and his ghosts. He saw her first, a figure too delicate for this land of frost and wolves. His heart clenched, not with desire at first, but with fear. She wouldn't last here. No woman that fine-boned, that pale, could endure a winter that stripped even the strongest men bare. "Mrs. Whitfield?" he called over the wind. She turned, her face soft but uncertain. "Miss Whitfield, I suppose I'm soon to be Mrs. Branner." He nodded, removing his hat. "Then I reckon we best get you out of this cold before you change your mind." That earned him a small smile. Her first. And though her lips trembled, she said, "I don't change my mind easily, Mr. Branner. I came all this way to begin something I won't regret." As they trudged toward his wagon, the wind howled louder. The blizzard swallowed the sound of the departing train, leaving only silence and the creak of wooden wheels. Cole lifted her trunk onto the wagon bed, his gloved hands brushing hers briefly. It was then she felt it, the warmth that lived beneath his roughness. The ride to the ranch was long and merciless. Snowflakes as large as petals clung to her bonnet, and the horizon vanished into a wall of white. Cole spoke little, but his eyes flicked toward her now and then, measuring her strength. She didn't complain. She didn't shiver. She simply stared forward as if daring the world to try her. When they reached the ranch, it appeared like a dark ghost in the storm. A wide cabin with a smoking chimney and a barn slouched beside it. 3 horses huddled beneath a wooden overhang, their flanks shivering. Cole jumped down first, extended a hand, and said softly, "Careful, it's slick." She took it, her gloved fingers small against his palm. For a moment they both paused, the storm raging around them, and in that instant something unspoken passed between them. Inside, the cabin was warm from the fire. The scent of pine and old leather filled the air. She stood near the hearth, thawing her hands while he poured coffee into tin mugs. "You didn't have to come," he said at last. She looked up, "And yet here I am." He studied her. The courage in her voice, the calmness of her eyes. Most women, they write letters. They talk about the West like it's some grand painting. Then they step off the train and see what it really is, hunger, cold, and loneliness. They don't stay. Nell took the cup, the steam curling against her cheeks. "Maybe I'm not most women." Cole almost smiled. "I'm starting to think that might be true." The night deepened. The blizzard outside screamed like a living thing. He gave her his bed, insisting he'd take the floor, but she hesitated. "You don't have to sleep on the ground for me," she said quietly. "Ma'am, I've slept on worse." She smiled again, faint and tired. "Then perhaps we'll both learn to share this space. The world's too big to face it apart." Her words lingered long after she lay beneath the quilts. Cole sat by the dying fire, staring into the flames. He hadn't expected warmth to return to this cabin, not after losing Lucy. Yet somehow the air felt alive again. In the morning, the snow had buried the fence line. Cole found her outside already, wearing his coat, struggling to shovel the path. "You'll freeze," he said. "Then I'll freeze doing something useful." That stopped him cold. He took the shovel from her hands, laughing for the first time in months. "You're stubborn, Miss Whitfield, and you're slow, Mr. Branner. I've been up an hour already." Their laughter echoed across the silent field. 2 souls thawing in a land of ice. By afternoon, the storm had calmed. The light on the snow turned golden. From the porch, they watched the sun slip behind the pines, a quiet peace settling between them. It's too big, she whispered. Cole frowned. What is? This land, this sky, this feeling. It's all too big, he nodded slowly. Then take your time, Miss Whitfield. He turned toward her, his voice low and gentle. Feel it slowly, so you'll never forget it. Her eyes met his, soft, uncertain, but glowing with something new. For the first time since she'd stepped off that train, she wasn't afraid. The morning after the blizzard, Elk Valley woke beneath a sky the color of pewter. Snow blanketed the world in silence, a silence so deep it made one aware of the pulse of their own heart. From the hills came the low bellow of a steer, somewhere beyond the frost-bitten pines. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. Cole Branner stirred from the chair where he had fallen asleep, his hat tilted forward on his face. The embers cast thin ribbons of orange light across the rough-hewn floorboards. Beside the hearth, Nell Whitfield stood already dressed, brushing the last dust of snow from her shawl. She had risen early, out of habit more than necessity. Back east, she'd woken every day before dawn to sew by candlelight, earning pennies for work that stole her eyesight and her youth. Here in this new country, the air felt different, freer, sharper. Even the cold tasted like a challenge she meant to conquer. Cole watched her quietly for a while before speaking. You're up early. She turned, startled, but smiled when she saw him. I couldn't sleep. The wind kept whispering all night. It sounded like it was calling someone's name. This country does that, he said, rubbing his jaw. You get used to it after a while. Or you start to listen, she replied softly. Her words unsettled him more than he cared to admit. It had been years since he'd shared this cabin with another soul. Years since Lucy's laughter had filled it. He wasn't sure what he expected from a mail-order bride. Maybe a timid woman who'd keep to her duties and not ask about the shadows that lived in his silence. But Nell, she looked at everything as if it meant something, as if even the ghosts were worth listening to. When she asked where the barn was, he offered to show her. The cold stung their faces as they stepped outside. The snow crunched under their boots and the sun glared off the frozen fields. A few cattle stood in the far pen, their breath steaming like small clouds. You got all this land? She asked. My pa claimed it after the war, Cole said. We built the house together. After he died, I stayed. Why? He shrugged. Someone had to. They reached the barn, a weathered structure leaning slightly eastward, its wood dark with age. When he pushed open the doors, the smell of hay and animal musk filled the air. 3 horses stamped and snorted softly from their stalls. This one's mine, he said, patting a brown mare. Daisy! Nell stepped closer, her breath clouding. She's beautiful. Stubborn as a preacher's wife, he said, smiling faintly. She laughed, and it startled him how much he liked the sound. It had been a long time since anything in this place felt alive. They spent the morning mending fences and shoveling paths through the snowdrifts. Nell refused to stay inside, even when the wind numbed her fingers. Cole found himself watching her more than he should. The way she pushed back her bonnet, the way her breath caught when she lifted heavy boards. There was a quiet strength in her that didn't come from muscle, but from endurance. By midday, he broke the silence. You don't scare easy. What's there to be scared of? She said, straightening up. He looked toward the horizon where the mountains tore through the sky like jagged knives. Plenty, she followed his gaze. Back home I was invisible. Here at least the world notices you, even if it's only to test you. That made him pause. He didn't know how to answer that. After lunch, cornbread and salted pork, Cole saddled up Daisy and told her he needed to ride to town for supplies. She offered to go along, but he shook his head. Storm might have washed out the trail. Safer if I go alone. She didn't argue, but when he left, the cabin felt emptier than she'd expected. Hours passed. The wind picked up again. By the time dusk fell, the light outside had turned gray-blue, and Cole still hadn't returned. Worry crept into her chest like slow-moving ice. She fed the fire, then walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the snow swirled, endless and blinding. She thought she heard hooves once, twice, but when she opened the door, there was nothing but the moan of wind and the far-off cry of a coyote. Night came heavy. Then, a sound. Faint, dragging. She grabbed the lantern and stepped outside. The flame flickered in the cold. And there he was, Cole, stumbling through the snow, one hand pressed against his side. Mr. Branner. She shouted, rushing toward him. He half collapsed against her. She caught his weight with surprising strength, her shawl flaring out behind her. His coat was torn and blood had frozen dark on the fabric. "What happened?" she gasped. "Ambush," he muttered, breathing hard. "Bandits near the ridge. 2 of them. Wanted the horse. I gave him the wagon instead. You're bleeding." "Not as bad as it looks," he said. Then his knees buckled. She dragged him inside, heart pounding. By the firelight she saw the wound more clearly, a deep slash across his ribs, probably from a knife. She tore strips from an old bedsheet, cleaned the wound with whiskey and wrapped it tight, her hands trembling but steady. He gritted his teeth. "You done this before?" "Sewed plenty of things," she said with forced calm. "Flesh ain't that different." His laugh came weak but genuine. "Remind me never to argue with you." Hours passed. She sat beside him as the storm howled outside, changing the bandage, feeding the fire, keeping him awake. He told her in broken whispers about the men who'd attacked him, drifters he'd seen before riding with a small gang out of Rawlins. "They'll be back," he said finally. "Men like that, they smell weakness." "Then we won't give them any," she replied. Her voice was fierce, quiet, and it steadied him. The night wore on. The fire dimmed to embers. Nell leaned back in the chair, exhaustion taking her, but her eyes never left him. Cole drifted between sleep and memory. He saw his late wife, Lucy, laughing under a cottonwood tree. He saw the war, the dust, the blood, the sound of distant bugles. And then he saw Nell, her hair falling loose from her bonnet, her face lit by firelight, her hands steady as she fought to keep him alive. In the thin hours before dawn, he woke to find her sitting beside him still, her head resting on her arms. She looked small and strong and heartbreakingly human. For a long time he simply watched her. When she stirred, blinking sleep away, he said quietly, "You saved me." She smiled faintly. "You're not that easy to kill, I think." He studied her face, the faint bruises of fatigue under her eyes, the way her lips curved even when she was bone-tired. "Nell," he said softly, "why'd you come out here?" "Really?" She hesitated. "Because," she whispered, "I needed to belong somewhere. I needed someone who might see me for what I am, not what I lost." His throat tightened. "What did you lose?" She looked into the fire. "A life that wasn't mine. A man I was supposed to marry. He died in a factory accident 3 weeks before the wedding. After that, I started reading those newspaper notices. Men seeking wives for the frontier. Yours was the only one that didn't sound desperate. You said you were looking for quiet company. I thought, maybe I could be that." He didn't speak for a long while. Then he said quietly, "You already are." Their eyes met, and in that silence something shifted. Small but certain, like the first crack of ice before the thaw. Outside, the storm passed. The wind gentled into a whisper and dawn began to stain the snow pale gold. Nell stood, walked to the window and said softly, "You were right about this land." He looked up from the bed. "How's that?" "It tests you," she said, "but it also teaches you how much you can bear." He smiled, a small, real smile, the kind a man only makes once he's seen death pass him by. And that was when she said it, without turning around, her voice low and thoughtful. "I think I understand now why you never smiled twice, Cole Branner." He frowned slightly. "And why's that?" She turned to him, her eyes bright with something between sorrow and admiration. "Because the first one cost you too much." The fire popped softly in the hearth. He said nothing, only looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized she was right. Outside, the world was beginning to wake again, and for the first time in years, so was he. The sun rose slow and red over Elk Valley, cutting through the mist that clung to the pines. Smoke curled gently from the chimney of the Branner Ranch, where the world inside was quiet, deceptively quiet. Cole Branner lay propped up against a pillow, his ribs still bandaged from the knife wound that had nearly taken his life. Every breath was a reminder of what he'd survived, every movement a whisper of pain that kept him aware of his fragility. Nell Whitfield sat by the window, her hands busy mending one of his shirts. The needle flicked in and out of the fabric with a steady rhythm. She worked quietly, but her eyes, those thoughtful gray-blue eyes, kept drifting to him. He looked smaller somehow lying there, the weight of his years and scars showing in the slant of his jaw and the hollow of his cheeks. She had seen men before who thought pain was weakness, but Cole bore it like he bore everything, in silence. He didn't complain. He didn't curse. He simply endured, as if the suffering was part of some greater agreement he'd made with the world. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt. The thaw came late in these parts, but when it did, it came suddenly. The ice on the eaves dripped like clockwork, and somewhere down the slope, the sound of running water carried faintly. The river had broken free. "You should rest," she said gently, without looking up from her stitching. "Been resting too long," he grumbled. "You almost died, Mr. Branner. I think that earns you a few quiet days." "Quiet days are when bad thoughts start creeping in." She smiled faintly. "Then we'll fill them with good ones." He looked at her, at the way the morning light touched her hair, turning the loose strands to silver threads. She was different from any woman he'd ever known. Not loud, not demanding. She moved through the house like a soft wind, always doing something, always making things better without calling attention to it. But she carried secrets. He could see that too. Some days her eyes looked far away, as if she were watching something that wasn't there. When he asked, she would simply say, "Just remembering." By afternoon, Cole decided he couldn't stand the bed any longer. He dressed slowly, ignoring the pain, and went outside. Nell followed him, worried but unwilling to argue. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of wet earth and pine sap. The world had changed overnight. Patches of brown grass peeked through the snow. The fence line, once buried, was visible again. A few blackbirds sat on the rail, singing as though they too were glad to be alive. He leaned against a post, breathing in the air. "Feels like the valley's waking up." "So are you," she said softly. He looked at her and smiled, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and warning. "Don't get used to it." "Too late," she said, returning the smile. They spent the rest of the day tending to the animals. She fetched water, brushed the horses, even helped haul feed. Cole watched her move with quiet efficiency. She wasn't a ranch woman, not by birth, but she was learning fast. And every time she laughed, that low, warm sound, he felt the house grow lighter. For a while, life seemed simple, peaceful. But peace in the West never lasted long. On the third morning, he saw the tracks, faint impressions in the soft mud near the creek. Not from cattle, not from deer. Horse tracks, 3 sets, maybe 4, leading toward the ridge. He followed them with his eyes, his pulse tightening. Nell came up beside him, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. She frowned. "You're lying." He looked at her, that same unflinching stare she always gave him when she knew something was wrong. "Tracks," he admitted. "Fresh. They don't belong to anyone I know." Her hand went still on the fabric. "The men from before?" "Could be. What will you do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked back to the barn and opened an old chest buried beneath a pile of blankets. Inside lay a revolver, nickel-plated, well-kept, and heavy with memory. He hadn't used it in years. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar. "You said you were done with guns," she whispered. "Men like that don't care what you're done with," he said. "They only care what they can take." She stepped closer. "Then let me help." He looked at her in disbelief. You ever fired one?" "No," she said calmly. "But I can learn." The determination in her voice startled him. She wasn't afraid, or if she was, she didn't show it. He sighed, handed her the revolver, and said, "All right, Miss Whitfield. Let's see what you're made of." Behind the barn, he set up a tin can on a fence post and walked her through the steps, loading the bullets, cocking the hammer, keeping her wrist steady. The first shot nearly knocked the gun from her hands. She gasped, startled by the kick, but her second shot came closer to the mark. Cole chuckled. "Not bad." She looked at him, cheeks flushed. "Don't patronize me, Mr. Branner, I'll hit it." And on the third try she did. The can spun off the post, clattering into the snow. He lowered his hat brim, hiding a grin. "Well, I'll be damned." "Language," she said, pretending to scold. "Yes, ma'am." They stood there for a while, the laughter between them soft and honest. For the first time, it felt like they were something close to partners, not just a man and a mail-order bride brought together by chance, but 2 souls beginning to build something neither could yet name. But that night, the peace shattered. The sound came just past midnight, hooves distant but deliberate. 4 riders, maybe 5, cutting through the dark like ghosts. Cole was up instantly. Nell woke to his hand on her shoulder, his voice low but urgent. "Get dressed. No light." She obeyed without question, pulling on her coat as he checked the rifle by the door. The dogs were growling outside, low and tense. The riders stopped at the fence line. Voices murmured. Too low to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. Greedy. Cruel. Nell's heart pounded. What do they want? Same thing they wanted before, Cole said. Only this time they think I'm too weak to stop them. He handed her the revolver. You remember what I taught you? She nodded. Good. If they come through that door, you don't hesitate. You aim for the chest, not the head. Don't waste a bullet. She swallowed hard. And you? He looked at her, really looked at her, and said quietly, I'll do what I've always done. The knock came then. Sharp. Mocking. Evening, rancher. A voice called. Heard you got yourself a new wife. Figured we'd come pay our respects. Cole stepped forward, rifle raised. You're not welcome here. Laughter answered him, 3 voices now, maybe 4. You can't keep what ain't yours, Branner. We've seen her. Pretty little thing for a man like you. Reckon she deserves better company. Nell froze, the words crawling under her skin like cold fire. Cole's voice hardened. You ride off now and I'll forget this happened. You don't. And I promise you'll regret it. Silence. Then, a single shot. The bullet tore through the front window, splintering the frame. Nell ducked, heart racing. Cole returned fire, shattering the darkness with thunder. The dogs barked furiously and the men outside scattered for cover. Nell, stay down, he shouted, reloading. But she didn't stay down. She crawled toward the window, found one of the riders silhouetted by the moonlight and fired. The recoil jolted her arm, but she saw him fall, a dark shape collapsing into the snow. The others cursed, retreating into the trees. Minutes passed before silence returned. The smoke hung thick in the cabin, smelling of gunpowder and fear. Cole lowered his rifle slowly. You all right? She nodded, trembling but alive. Did we? One's dead. The others'll run for now. He crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. She was shaking. Not from cold, but from everything that had just happened. You did good, he said softly. Real good. She looked up at him, eyes wide with disbelief. I killed a man. He paused, then said gently, No, Nell. You saved one. Outside, the snow glowed faintly in the moonlight, pale and peaceful again, as if the valley itself had exhaled. But they both knew peace wouldn't last. Men like that didn't forgive, and the West had a way of collecting debts in blood. As dawn approached, Cole stood at the door watching the pale horizon. Nell came up beside him, wrapping her shawl tight. Will they come back? They always do, he said quietly. Trouble never forgets the road it came from. She looked at him then, her voice steady but full of something that sounded like faith. Then neither will we. He turned, meeting her gaze, and for the first time, saw in her the same fire that had once burned in him, the will to survive, to stand her ground no matter what came. And though he didn't say it aloud, he knew the truth that would carry them through the storms ahead. Whatever happened next, they wouldn't be facing it alone. For days, the quiet farmhouse that once echoed with laughter now sat heavy with unease. The curtains stayed drawn, the lights dim, and the once warm scent of baked bread and lavender soap was replaced by something cold. Fear. Tom hardly slept. He spent every waking hour trying to piece together what was happening to his daughter, Amelia. But each clue seemed to dissolve into more confusion. The neighbors had started whispering. They'd noticed that the once energetic little girl was no longer seen playing in the garden. The cheerful father who used to wave from his porch now looked like a shadow of himself. Haunted eyes, trembling hands. But what none of them knew was that Tom had finally found a lead. He'd remembered the small camera he had installed in the living room, a security measure he'd added years ago after a string of local burglaries. It was old and half forgotten, but maybe, just maybe, it had captured something that could explain Amelia's strange behavior. That night, after putting her to bed, he retrieved the dusty hard drive from the drawer, plugged it into his computer, and opened the folder of recordings. At first, the footage seemed painfully ordinary. Amelia coloring on the carpet, his wife Sarah folding laundry, the flicker of TV light on the walls. But as Tom scrolled through the nights, he began to notice something, a figure faint at first, then growing more distinct in each clip. It appeared only around 3 a.m., when everyone should have been asleep. At first, he thought it was Sarah, until he saw Sarah asleep in bed, visible in the frame from the baby monitor. Then who was it? The figure was tall, lean, dressed in something dark and loose. It moved soundlessly, almost gliding rather than walking. And what froze Tom's blood was where it stopped, by Amelia's crib. The figure stood there for several minutes each night, its head tilted as though studying the child. Then, with a movement too slow, too deliberate to be human, it reached into the crib and rested its hand, if you could call that shadow a hand, on Amelia's forehead. Tom's heart thundered in his chest. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. He wanted to believe it was a glitch, a trick of light. But the way Amelia stirred, the way she whimpered in her sleep each time, it was real. He paused the footage, trembling. His first instinct was to rush upstairs and wake Sarah, but he couldn't. Not yet. He needed to know more. He fast-forwarded to the next night. Again at 3 a.m. the figure returned. This time it seemed to notice the camera. Slowly it turned its head toward the lens. And though its face was hidden by the darkness, Tom felt the unmistakable sensation that it was looking directly at him. Through time. Through glass. Right into his soul. He stumbled backward from his desk, his chair clattering to the floor. The air felt thick, charged with something unnatural. His hand shook so badly he could barely shut the computer. But before he did, he caught one last frame. Amelia, sitting upright in her crib, her eyes wide open, staring at the same corner where the figure had vanished. The next morning, Tom couldn't hide the truth anymore. He showed the footage to Sarah. Her reaction was immediate: screams, disbelief, tears. "It has to be someone breaking in," she insisted, clinging to reason. "Maybe a reflection, or..." "No reflection looks at a camera," Tom said, his voice hoarse. "No shadow moves like that." They argued for hours, both desperate for an explanation that would make sense, but there was none. That night, neither of them slept. They took turns watching Amelia's room through the monitor, waiting for 3 a.m. at exactly 2:57. The air shifted. The temperature in the house dropped so fast that the windows fogged up. The clock on the wall ticked louder, slower, until each second sounded like a heartbeat. Then came the creak, the unmistakable groan of a floorboard bending under unseen weight. Tom's eyes darted to the monitor. The camera flickered. Static filled the screen, then cleared, and there it was again. The same figure standing by Amelia's bed, only this time its form was clearer. The darkness seemed to cling to it like smoke. Its head tilted once more, but then something new happened. Amelia opened her eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth, trembling. "Tom, she's awake." Tom didn't think. He bolted from his chair, charged up the stairs, and burst into Amelia's room. The air was so cold it felt like stepping into a freezer. The curtains were billowing, though the windows were closed. And by the crib, nothing. The figure was gone. Amelia looked up at her father with sleepy eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "why did the man leave?" "He said you'd be scared." Tom froze. "What man?" "The man who comes to play with me when it's dark," she said innocently. "He said you don't remember him." Those words hit Tom like a blade. Don't remember him? What did that mean? He exchanged a terrified glance with Sarah, who had followed him in. "Honey," Sarah whispered, "maybe we should take her somewhere. Get help." But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't something a doctor could explain. That night's footage, he knew what he saw. And Amelia's words. They suggested something deeper, something reaching back into the past. He couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room watching the monitor, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Every creak of the walls made his skin crawl. Then, just as he began to drift off, the monitor blinked once, then twice, and the static returned. A whisper came through the speakers. Faint, distant, but clear enough to send chills down his spine. "Tom," he jerked awake. "Who's there?" The voice came again, soft but unmistakable. "You promised you wouldn't forget." The camera image flickered just for a moment. But in that brief flash, Tom saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the shadow figure anymore. It was a man, a younger version of himself, standing beside Amelia's crib, staring into the lens. The whisper came one last time, before the monitor went dark. "Remember me." Tom didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face, his own younger face, staring back at him from the baby monitor. Eyes hollow, expression unreadable, whispering words that crawled under his skin. "Remember me." He wanted to believe it was a hallucination, the product of exhaustion or grief. But deep down, a truth was tugging at the edge of his mind. Something he had long buried, something he wasn't ready to face. Sarah tried to hold their home together, but even she was unraveling. The mornings were thick with tension, Amelia's giggles now replaced with quiet humming, the same eerie tune that sometimes echoed through the halls at night. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic in an attempt to distract herself, Sarah found an old box she didn't recognize. Dust coated the lid and the label had nearly faded, but one word remained visible in Tom's messy handwriting. "Don't open." Her heart sank. She hesitated, then called for Tom. He came up slowly, eyes wary. When he saw the box, his face drained of color. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "In the back corner under the old chest," she said. "Tom, what is this?" He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt and traced the edges of the box with trembling fingers like someone greeting an old ghost. After a long pause, he finally said, "It's from before we moved here." "Before Amelia was born?" Sarah crouched beside him, her voice soft. "Before Amelia? Tom, I thought you'd only lived in one house before this." He swallowed hard. Not exactly. The silence between them grew heavy. Then, almost mechanically, he pried open the lid. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photos, and a small stuffed toy, a faded blue bear missing one eye. Beneath it, a single birth certificate. Name, Ethan Thomas Miller. Date of birth, April 3rd, 2012. Status, deceased. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Tom, who is Ethan?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "My son," he said finally. His voice was barely a whisper. Her world tilted. "You had a son?" "You never told me." Tom ran a shaking hand through his hair, eyes glassy. "It was before I met you, before I ever thought I could be a father again." He sat down as if the weight of his memories had crushed his knees. "It happened 12 years ago. I was living in a small town outside Denver. My wife then, Lily, she died during childbirth. And Ethan. He survived, but just barely. He was always frail, always sick. I did everything I could, but the hospital bills..." He stopped, biting back a sob. "One night during a storm, he had trouble breathing. I called for help, but by the time the ambulance came, he was gone. He broke off, covering his face. I couldn't handle it. I blamed myself. I buried everything that reminded me of him. The house, the photos, even his name." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled up. "Oh my God, Tom." He continued, voice cracking. "I told myself I'd move on. That forgetting was the only way to survive. I met you a year later, and for the first time I felt alive again. When Amelia was born, I promised I'd protect her, that I'd never let anything happen to her." Sarah stared at him, connecting the impossible dots. "You think the thing visiting Amelia is Ethan?" Tom looked up, eyes haunted. He said, "You promised you wouldn't forget. Sarah, I think it's him. I think my son, our son one, is trying to reach me." Sarah shook her head. "That's not possible. He's gone, Tom. Maybe you're just..." But she stopped mid-sentence when the baby monitor on the floor crackled to life. Static filled the air, followed by a soft, trembling voice. "Daddy." Sarah froze. The voice was unmistakably that of a child, gentle, fragile, but filled with longing. Tom's hands went numb. Slowly, he picked up the monitor. "Ethan?" There was silence. Then faintly, "Why did you forget me?" Tears streamed down his face. "I didn't mean to, son. I couldn't bear the pain." "Pain?" the voice whispered. "You promised to stay with me when it got dark." "But you left." Sarah covered her mouth, shaking. The room felt colder, the light dimmer. Tom clutched the monitor like it was the last lifeline to the truth. "Ethan, please. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I was broken. I didn't know how to live without you." Static roared for a few seconds. Then a soft, almost sorrowful sigh came through. "She looks like me, Daddy. The girl in the bed. She's not scared of me." Sarah gasped. "Oh my God." Tom looked toward Amelia's room. The door at the end of the hall had slowly swung open by itself. A soft light flickered within, the glow of her night lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Tom stood. "Ethan," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I'm coming." Sarah grabbed his arm. "No, Tom, please," but he gently pushed her away. "If he's really here, I need to see him." He walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The air felt dense, like walking underwater. The house seemed to hum with a low, sorrowful energy. When he reached Amelia's room, he stopped at the doorway. She was sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide but calm. Beside her stood a faint, translucent figure, the outline of a boy, maybe 8 or 9, with tousled hair and eyes that shimmered like mist. He held the same blue stuffed bear from the box. Tom's heart shattered. "Ethan." The boy turned, his expression both sad and hopeful. "You remember now?" Tom nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I never stopped loving you, I just didn't know how to face it." Ethan stepped closer, his form flickering like a candle flame. "You left me in the dark, Daddy, it was so cold." Tom dropped to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry, son. I should have been there. I should have stayed." Ethan's gaze softened. "I'm not angry anymore. I just wanted you to see me, to remember." He turned to Amelia, who smiled up at him. "Thank you for playing with me," she said. "Will you come again?" Ethan shook his head gently. "No, it's time for me to sleep now." "Daddy remembers." That's all I needed. The air shimmered. The temperature began to rise. The shadows receded. Ethan's figure began to fade, his smile lingering last of all. Tom reached out instinctively, whispering, "I love you, Ethan." And the voice, now distant, peaceful, answered one final time, "I know." The room fell silent. The clock on the wall ticked normally again. The house exhaled as if released from a long, sorrowful dream. Sarah stood in the doorway, tears streaming, clutching Amelia. Tom remained kneeling on the floor, his face buried in his hands, shaking, but not from fear this time. From release. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lift. The haunting was not a curse. It was a plea for remembrance. But as the night deepened and the family finally drifted into uneasy sleep, one last flicker appeared on the monitor downstairs. The faint image of a boy, sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding his stuffed bear. He smiled softly at the camera and whispered, "Good night, Daddy." Then the screen went dark. The dawn came slowly that morning, as though the sun itself hesitated to rise over the house that had carried so much pain. For the first time in weeks, the silence wasn't heavy. It was calm, like a sigh of relief that drifted through the walls. The creak of the floorboards, once an omen, now felt like the old bones of the house stretching awake after a long sleep. Tom sat in the kitchen with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold hours ago. His eyes were swollen, and his body felt like it had aged a decade overnight. But for the first time since moving into this home, he wasn't afraid to look at the baby monitor sitting on the table. Its screen was dark, lifeless, and peaceful. No flickers, no whispers, no static. Just silence. Sarah entered quietly, a soft shawl around her shoulders, her hair tangled from a restless night. She paused when she saw him, unsure of what to say. So she didn't speak. She simply walked over, poured herself a cup, and sat across from him. They stayed that way for a long while, the morning light creeping between the curtains, painting them both in gold. Finally, Tom broke the silence. "It's strange," he said softly, his voice rough. "The house feels lighter, like something finally let go." Sarah nodded. "Or maybe you did." He looked up at her then, and for a moment she saw the man she had married, the one who carried both strength and sorrow in equal measure. "I've been running from that night for 12 years, he said. "From the hospital. From Ethan. I thought forgetting him would make it easier to live." Her voice trembled. "But you never really forgot." "No," he whispered. "I buried him so deep that he had to find a way back." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "He wasn't angry, Tom, he just wanted to be remembered." Tom nodded, his eyes misting. "He always used to ask me if I'd tell him stories before bed. Every night I promised I would, but that last night I didn't. He was tired, and I told him I'd tell 2 the next day." His lips quivered. There was no next day. Tears rolled silently down Sarah's cheeks. "Maybe it's time you tell that story now." He smiled faintly through the ache. "Maybe it is." Later that day, Tom went up to the attic again. The light through the small circular window fell gently across the old wooden floorboards, illuminating dust motes that swirled like lazy ghosts in the air. He sat cross-legged, the box of Ethan's things beside him. This time he didn't flinch when he opened it. He pulled out the photos, one of Lily holding baby Ethan, both smiling under a summer sun, and placed it carefully on his lap. Then the little blue bear, the one Ethan had loved most. Its fur was matted, the eye still missing, but somehow it seemed to hold warmth again. He whispered softly, "Hey, buddy, I didn't forget this time." The air stirred faintly, like a breeze brushing past him. The faintest scent of baby powder and rain lingered, the kind that always clung to Ethan after bath time. Tom closed his eyes, breathing it in. It wasn't haunting anymore. It was memory, gentle, bittersweet, and whole. He stayed there for hours, talking softly to the air, telling Ethan stories he'd never had the chance to tell. About the ranch, about Sarah, about Amelia, about how much he wished his son could have met her. And though there was no reply, he felt something, a warmth spreading through his chest, a kind of peace that had been absent for so long it felt foreign. It was as though Ethan had heard him and smiled. That evening, the family sat together by the fire. Amelia played on the rug with her toys, occasionally glancing up at her parents, her laughter light and musical. The baby monitor lay turned off on the mantel, where Tom had placed it deliberately, not as a warning anymore, but as a reminder. Sarah leaned against Tom's shoulder, the crackle of the fire filling the quiet. "Do you think he's gone now?" she asked. Tom looked at the flames for a long moment. "No," he said softly. "I think he's finally home." She nodded. "I think so too." The firelight flickered across their faces. Two people forever changed, not by horror but by love rediscovered. Amelia crawled into her father's lap, clutching the blue bear she'd found earlier in the attic. She held it up to him, smiling sleepily. "Daddy, can I keep him?" Tom froze for a second, his throat tightening. He took the bear gently from her, brushing his thumb over the missing eye. Then he nodded. "Yes, sweetheart." He'd like that. Amelia hugged the bear close and leaned against his chest, her eyelids drooping. "He's warm," she mumbled. "Like sunshine." Tom's eyes glistened and he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Yeah," he whispered. That's exactly what he was. Sarah reached for his hand and squeezed it, her eyes saying what words couldn't. Together, they watched the flames dance and fade into embers, a soft glow filling the room. For the first time since they moved into that old house, the night came peacefully. No whispers, no cold drafts, no flickering lights, just stillness and a deep, aching gratitude. Weeks passed. Tom started visiting the local church again. He volunteered at the orphanage nearby, fixing toys and reading stories to the children. Each time he told a story, he imagined Ethan sitting among them, listening, smiling, forgiven. Sarah noticed the change in him. He laughed more now. He slept through the night. The darkness that had once clung to his eyes had lifted. One evening, while putting Amelia to bed, she looked up at him with that same bright curiosity Ethan once had and asked, "Daddy, do you think angels remember us?" Tom smiled softly. "I think they never forget, sweetheart. Even when we can't see them. Especially then." She nodded thoughtfully and curled up under her blanket. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night, my little sunshine." As he turned off the light, he caught sight of the old blue bear tucked beside her pillow, its one eye glinting faintly in the dark. He felt the air warm slightly, like the soft breath of a sigh against his cheek. He whispered, "Good night, Ethan." For a moment he thought he heard a faint reply, a boy's voice carried on the wind. "Good night, Daddy." And with that, Tom knew the haunting was never about punishment. It was about memory. Love that refused to die even when everything else did. He walked out of the room and stood in the hallway, staring at the framed photo on the wall. A new one Sarah had taken last week. It showed all three of them sitting under the oak tree in the backyard, Amelia in his lap, Sarah's hand resting on his shoulder. The light in their faces was real, and in the faint reflection of the glass, for just a heartbeat, Tom thought he saw a fourth figure, a small boy standing behind them, smiling. Whole again. Then the reflection shimmered and vanished. He didn't cry this time. He just smiled, because some goodbyes weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to heal. And as he turned off the lights, the old house creaked once in a soft, contented sigh, as if it too had finally found peace.